All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me well. Welcome to another episode of Hoot with me, Yuval from solo.io, here with you to give you some technology updates. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about HashiCorp's new product, Waypoint, which I'm excited to talk about. I like HashiCorp products. They usually have products that are very thoughtful in the way how they solve the problem they solve. Now, I'm by no means a Waypoint expert. It's only been out for a couple of months. So I'll be also talking about how, my approach into learning about new products and how I evaluate them. And of course, if there's any questions, obviously feel free to ask, and I will, answer them live as I usually do. All right. Before we get started, a bit of house cleaning. We have a Git repo for the episodes with the show notes, where you can suggest new episode. It's in GitHub solo.io/hoot, and feel free to go there. Open an issue if you want to see a topic covered, and we love our community feedback. And there's a little list that we've started curating of things we want to start doing soon. All right. So, let's see, what else do I have to say here? I think that's good. All right. So, let's talk a little bit about Waypoint. So, what is Waypoint? Waypoint is a product from HashiCorp, and let me get my little slides here going. That the goal of it is to help part of the development lifecycle, right? So development lifecycle in general, you build the code, you write some unit tests, you do all that. Then you need to kind of deploy it into prod or into dev or into test environment. And that's where the problem that Waypoint wants to solve. So as far as I understand it, it's kind of the thing that we today hack around with Makefiles and scripts. They try to give a more uniform abstraction to the developers, so they don't have to think, which make command they need to run, what helm command they need to run. They just want you to do Waypoint up, and you'll have your application up. So that's kind of the general idea. So think preview environments in CI, deployment to dev or prod, and you can. I really recommend you watch the introduction that Mitchell did to Waypoint to understand more the use case they're targeting. So what I gather, they don't really target they can do it, but I don't think that's the main use case of laptop environment, something that tools like Draft or Scaffold do for you. But more where the environments are shared in a dev cluster, in a test cluster, in a prod cluster, and you need some more management around the deployment, right? So that's kind of my own personal impression. And again, the caveat that I'm by no means expert, and you should definitely seek out more opinions if you plan to use this. So when we're gonna go into a bit to the technicals in a sec. When you deploy essentially with Waypoint, they have this nice run service that gives you a URL that you can access your deployment and see it running live. I obviously wouldn't use it for production, but it's a good getting started experience. And I think that's one of the things that HashiCorp do really well, is they give you a way to just get started, right? Like, for example, console has a dev mode. You want to run console and don't want to fuss around too much, you do console dev mode or console-dev, something like that, and just runs. So in some idea, this run URL just gives you something to get started so you can move on and make some progress on your project. And we'll see that URL in a second when we get to it. So yes, let's talk a little bit about how it's structured. And this diagram is from their docs, which we'll also review a little bit in a sec. Now, the way, and that's part of the reason why I think the main use case for Waypoint is not kind of the laptop scenario, because it does have a server, and that server does have persistent state. It has a database that you need to kind of back up if you want to have it be long running, right? So you have the command line. The command line talks to the Waypoint server, and you know, the server for every deployment has a component injected to it, and we're going to talk about this also a little bit more. And that component kind of streams logs and debug data to the server, right? So essentially, when you build something with the command line, you build your application, because Waypoint also does the build part. They actually inject this entry point binary into your container, into your Docker container. And then when it's deployed, it has this entry point binary that can communicate with the Waypoint server, and you know, send the logs and allow exec information, right? So exec would start at the CLI, go through the server and through the entry point. Now, the advantage of this, will work in environments that are not Kubernetes, right? It's a generic way to get logs and exec, something that Kubernetes might give you already, but it's a way to do it for any type of platform, Kubernetes, EC2, or Nomad. It's a way to do it in a way that's consistent to the developer experience, right? And when I'll do the demo, I have some more thoughts on, you know, the security aspects of that, but that's I believe the motivation for why the architecture looks how it looks like. All right, so what else I want to say about the architecture? Talked about the entry point. Yes, an entry point can be disabled, but then you'll have obviously some functionality lacking, right? You cannot get the logs, you cannot do exec. It'll make the experience less enjoyable. All right, so now I want to a little bit talk about how, you know, it's a new project. How did I, you know, go about understanding what is it doing, how does it doing it, and all that. And then I have a Waypoint set up in my test cluster. I'm gonna play around with it, see what it does. So the general flow is that you have a project. The project can have one or more app, and each of these apps you can deploy, a release, build, deploy, release, and you can have hooks to customize the behavior, right? So usually when you deploy an app, you don't necessarily want to release it. And by release, I mean, you know, making it publicly available. So you can use something like a hook to add some tests between after the deploy phase and before the release phase, right? These hooks let you customize the behavior between each of these steps of build, deploy, release. All right, so that's kind of like the background. I hope it all makes sense, and we're going to review some of their documentation now, and then going to review some how, you know, going to play around a little bit with the command line and see how it all works. So let's go to the web browser, and if there's any question, I'm looking at the chat, so feel free to ask. All right, this is our website, just so you have a reference. All right, let's go to the Waypoint. So usually when I need to evaluate a new open source project, a good starting point is actually their GitHub repo, right? So when I look at the repo, I don't necessarily straight delve into the code, because it's a lot to learn, you know, a new code base. I look for a few, you know, key indicators, let's call it. So first thing, you look at the languages it's written. It's written in Go, which is nice, because a lot of people know Go in our community, which means they're more likely to get open source contributions. And then I look at the kind of general directory structure, and it looks a very standard Go structure, a CMD folder for the binaries, and you can see that you have the waypoint and the entry point binary, and you have an internal endpoint where all the rest of the Go code lives. And you can see that each package has a meaningful name. So it already shows kind of like they know what they're doing as far as the development. It's not a messy project, you know, it's in the right language for the ecosystem. You see the docs and the website are also here. So far so good. Another thing I like to look at just to make sure, the project's still alive and kicking is the contributions. So if you go to Insights Contributions, you can see kind of the graph of contributions, and you can see there's a good steady stream of contributions. If this thing were to flatline, I might not even continue to look at it because you don't want to use a project that's not maintained. Now, some projects don't have a lot of documentation, but HashiCorp's projects usually have a fair amount of documentation. So that's the next step I would go when I evaluate the project. And I would look in their documentation website, and they really have good documentation here, and I recommend you read it. Specifically, the reference for their configuration file, what it can do, and my favorite part, of course, the internals, the architecture, how does it work, considerations of deployment in production. They cover it all here, which is a really good sign. So that's good. So far it looks good, and here you can read essentially what they think, what they're doing. Another thing I like to look at is a YouTube talks. So the announcement, and I have some links in the show notes when I'll upload them to GitHub after the episode. So the announcements, maybe they have some demos, interviews, stuff like that. Kind of understand exactly what they were thinking when they wrote the code, the stuff that you can just get from a documentation or source code. All right, with that, let's talk a little bit more technical, do a little bit look at how an application looks like, how do you use Waypoint. So with that, let me move to my trusty VS Code. All right, and you can see that this VS Code is set up with the Waypoint examples repo that has an example, and we'll specifically look at the Kubernetes Node.js example. And this is the Waypoint HCL file. Now I already installed Waypoint. I'll have the commands that I used to install it in the show notes in GitHub after the episode, along with a summary of my thoughts on the project. So feel free to read and comment. And yes, so let's talk a bit about the structure of this application. So you can see it's a Node.js application. I'm not a Node.js programmer, so I might be misrepresenting how the Node.js part works, but and it starts with an index.js and a package JSON that describes how to package it. It's all the public, the views are part of the Node application. The Waypoint related is this Waypoint HCL file. So we'll focus on that. All right, so we can see that it starts with a project, right? And if you recall, that's kind of the hierarchy of Waypoint. It has projects, and a project can have one or more application. So you can see there's an application stanza in here. And each application has these steps that we talked about: build, deploy, and release, right? Let me minimize the console for now till we need it. So build, we use the Node.js build pack here. That's the pack part. We also going to push the build artifact to a registry because I'm using a remote cluster. Then I need the image to be available to my Kubernetes cluster, right? So we push the image to a remote registry, and that's the build part. The deploy part creates a deployment in Kubernetes, right? And this is where to do the liveness probe. So this will create a deployment, and the release part will expose it with a load balancer, essentially. All right, so this is pretty straightforward. And like other HashiCorp products, Waypoint is also extendable, right? That's one of the things I really like about HashiCorp product. They really thought about extendability. It's very easy to create a plugin and extend it to more use cases. So with that file, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I do like the fact that it kind of abstracts away all the scriptery. So usually when we want to build stuff, There's not a lot of good options to abstract it, so we usually just revert back to using make files and create make targets that are easier to consume than the Docker command you need to remember in order to do something. So I like the cleanness here. And to deploy this, we just do waypoint up, kind of like, vagrant up, right? And now let's see what this step does. Let's maximize the terminal here. And in the meantime, of course, Docker permission. It's not a show without a technical issue. So it uses Docker and I'm using Fedora. And with Fedora, they don't come with Docker anymore. So I need to do some schmodding. Sorry about that. Here we go. I'll give myself permissions to use my own Docker and turn off security so it works. All right, waypoint up again. Sorry about that. Keeping it real, as they say. In the meantime, while it's doing that, if there's any questions, feel free to ask. So the main thing I wanted to show here is that it's using the Heroku Node.js build pack. It detected it's a Node.js application, right? So it's getting all the Node stuff, and it's using the build pack to build it. And that will build a Docker image with Node in it, right? Let this thing move on a little bit. All right, now this is the also part I want to focus on, injecting entry point binary to image, right? So in here you can see that after it builds the image using the build pack, it injects its own entry point component onto the image, right? So it takes the Docker image and it modifies it by adding an entry point binary and setting that binary to be the image entry point. And we look at how it's deployed on the cluster, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So everything been successfully deployed, and you can see I have the waypoint run URL, and this will be unique for every deployment. And that's nice that they give you this kind of URL that you can just use. And let's open it up in the browser, show you what it looks like. And one sec, let me transition to the browser. Here we go. So this is the waypoint run URL, as you can see, and the application, the Node.js application, that's the demo application from the examples, is deployed. There's only a link to the documentation here, but it's just for a demo purpose. All right, so that was pretty easy, I gotta say. Pretty nice experience overall. Let's go back to the code here. But one thing that I did notice that Waypoint doesn't have, at least for now, I'm pretty sure, I'm assuming they're gonna fix it, is that I didn't see any way of having some sort of access control of, this user can deploy to that cluster or to that environment or this application. I would assume that would come in the future. I know that Waypoint is a very, very young project. They just, announced it version 0.1 a few months ago. But that's something I noticed that kind of like was missing if I wanted to use this as my main, deployment driver. It does give a very, very nice experience. Now let's look a little bit on the cluster and see what got deployed. So let's clear the screen here. Let's look at get deployment. And you can see I have two deployments, one because I tested it in the morning and one from now. And let's look at this deployment and see what hides inside. All right, ignoring all the other stuff, let's focus on the container that's running. And you can see that it injected these Waypoint environment variables. I should probably not show you the token, but I'm going to destroy the server right after the talk, so it's fine for now. So it needs essentially what happens here. There's the binary that's running is not Node.js, right? It's the Waypoint entry point, and the entry point will run Node.js as a child process, and you can see that the entry point needs a way to communicate to the Waypoint server in order to get those advanced features like log streaming and exec and all that, right? So you give it essentially the address to the server, and you give it a token to authenticate with the server, so the server knows that it's the entry point and it can give it permissions accordingly, right? And an entry point token cannot be used to create new deployments, for example. All right, so, and let's do Waypoint Log just to see. So this is nice. It kind of, just works. You don't need to know about namespaces, deployments, or pods. It just connects to the server and gets the logs that the application streamed to it, right? Another thing you can do is the shell, Waypoint Shell, exec. Too many commands. Bin bash. And here you can see that you have the Waypoint entry point running as PID1, right? That's the entry point in the container, and that runs npm and all that. And in addition, if we look at the socket select, you can see Waypoint talking to the Waypoint server, right? So this is how they kind of do the magic of getting all the logs and all the executability configuration. I know they plan to do some more stuff with that, but this is kind of the secret sauce on how Waypoint works. One more thing I wanted to show is that Waypoint management service, the GUI that's got deployed. So let me switch back to the browser. And you can see that when you install Waypoint, and again, it'll be in the show notes explanation how to do it, it's a project, and project, you get the access to the UI. You can see there's a project. This is the project I just deployed. And you can see the logs coming in. You can see the latest builds, releases. So a nice UI. It's read-only as far as I can tell, but still, UIs are kind of nice to have. You can see the deployment I just did. Click around. You can't just log into the service willy-nilly. You use the command line to create a token to authenticate with it. So this is nice. So you can just deploy it and not worry about random people deploying stuff on your Waypoint server. Yes. So one sec, let me see. Yeah, this is the main thing I wanted to cover about Waypoint. It's a very young product, and I want to conclude with some final thoughts. So I do recognize the gap they're trying to solve, right? Doing a Waypoint app is way easier than doing a Helm install release repo chart, set this value to that value, right? It's nice that all the options you need to deal with are already configured in a config file, and you as a new developer in the company don't need to think too much. You just do Waypoint app and things magically work. Same for Waypoint logs. It's way easier to do Waypoint logs than now. The alternative is, if you're in Kubernetes, you need to know where's the Kubernetes, where is it deployed, what pod, what namespace, what this, what that, right? So that's I really like the experience they're trying to get to achieve here. I do see some drawbacks technically, right? I think at least I couldn't find any way to restrict access, any access control. So it's kind of a have access or not have access, which is not ideal for larger teams. I do find the need to inject that entry point to get those extra features a bit awkward, especially if you target, if you want to change your existing deployments. It'd be kind of, if you already have a build pipeline and you just want to use it for the logs, exit, debugging features, it is a bit annoying that you have to use a Waypoint to build the container so it gets this injection, right? I think you could go around it in two ways. One, you can either have, Waypoint have another inject command that takes a Docker image and produces an injected image, or maybe if the platform is Kubernetes, use the Kubernetes native logging and exit capabilities instead of relying on the entry point being injected. It's a bit disruptive to require this inject to happen, especially if you already have an existing pipeline and you just want to kind of gradually use Waypoint. Yes. And I have most of everything I said and show summarized in the show notes. I will also have some links to more resources, other reviews, the announcements, demos, that sort of stuff, so you can make up your own mind. By all means, it's a new product, exciting to look at it, but I'm by no means expert, so feel free to poke around and see if there's more information that would help you make a decision here. That is pretty much all I have for today. So if there's any questions, feel free to ask them now. If not, you can always join our Slack. I'm there. You can post issues on our GitHub repo to ask, suggest episodes or make other suggestions. Our next hoot, I believe it's going to be about Istio multi-cluster. Let me double check. We have our hoot playlist, and it's going to be, I think, already in the new year. After the holidays, we take a little bit of a holiday break. Our next hoot will be Advanced Istio Configuration with Envoy CRDs, hosted by Scott Weiss, and it's going to be on January 12th, 2021. We're going to do a little bit of a holiday break until the holidays end. And I hope everybody have a great day. Thank you for joining me, and I'm looking forward to see you next time. Oh, I see a question. Would you use alongside GitOps release flow? Is more of a replacement? So I think one of the flows that I've seen is use it alongside a pull request to create a preview environment, right? So I think you can use it alongside GitOps. I don't think it's meant to be used instead of, but like I said, I'm by no means an expert. So the demo I've seen is that you have a pull request and there's a GitHub action that uses Waypoint to deploy the modified code of the, with the suggested change included in it into a different, and provide with an environment just for that pull request. So you can kind of check that the changes make sense before you approve the pull request. So I don't think it's a replacement, but more alongside, yeah. Thank you, Shane, for that question. And with that, I'll end the stream for today. Have a good day, everybody. And I will see you after the holidays.